What we're looking for is to have perfectly clear water coming out of that hose. That's pretty much clear rather than trusty brown rusty over here. Fluid's pretty clear. We'll give that a minute to drain. Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the build room. In this week's episode, we are back working on Dunfa now, a 1977 liftback Celica. And in the last episode, we had a few troubles with the water pump and other bits and pieces. And today we're gonna try and get it driving under its own power. And I know it's gonna put up a fight. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so a massive episode today, and we are going to tie out the series for Dunfa Now. I think this is about the 6th episode in the whole Celica to Dunfa Now series, and if I'm honest, Violet Crumbles is starting to feel a bit neglected. So today we're going to finish things out with Dunfa, we're going to get it running and driving, and it's going to make my life a lot easier trying to move it around the property. Now I'm not expecting smooth sailing here because we did have a few issues on this in the last episode. So let's jump out into the driveway now and see what we're working with. All right, so this is where we left off last week. We've got the engine in, it runs, it doesn't idle well, that carb needs some work. We don't have any brakes at the moment. There's no fluid in there. I'm not even sure what sort of braking system this thing's got, so that'll be a good one for us to discover today. We did get the cooling system in, which was good, except for the water pump, which has a leak, which was unsurprising. Since we did have it running for a small period though, I did change the oil and filter on the car, which was good, but we did notice that there's water in the oil of the gearbox, so I need to change that oil as well. So anyway, I think the first port of call for today is gonna be the cooling system. So just give me 2 seconds and I'll grab the replacement water pump. All right, so this is the water pump we're gonna be replacing the busted one with today. Obviously this is secondhand, so I'm hoping it's good. It could also be bad, we'll see. But basically, there's not much to a water pump. They're a pretty simple and elegant design, and they're pretty effective most of the time. There is an impeller at the back, and then there is a shaft which is driven from a belt that goes around the crankshaft pulley, and it spins this, and in turn spins the impeller, pushes the water around the motor. And if we look at the water pump on the bottom, there is actually a weep hole. Now that weep hole is there to allow fluid to exit the pump. Now that happens from time to time, and it's not necessarily an indicator that the pump has a fault. So there is a seal on the back of the shaft near the impeller, and there is a bearing at the front of the shaft near where the pulley will attach. Now the bearing at the front is lubricated with an oil, so obviously you don't want water getting past the seal at the back and pushing forward into that bearing, because it's going to push the lubricant out of the bearing and it's going to chew itself out pretty quickly. So instead there is a gap between those two, and that allows any water that gets pushed past this seal just to dribble out of this hole. Conversely, if there's a problem with the bearing and it starts ejecting its lubricant, the lubricant will drip out of the hole, and then you might see oil coming out of there. Now that second one indicates that there's a pretty big problem. The first one will happen from time to time. You will occasionally get a small amount of fluid coming out of that weep hole, and that just means that some water's got past the seal. What you don't want to see is what we had in the last episode, where we just had a constant stream of water coming out of this hole, because that means the seal at the back of the pump is gone completely. So yeah, this pump has been in a storage box for quite some time, so I'm hoping it's good, but I can't be sure because I didn't pull it off the car that it came off. But it's worth a shot until our new pump arrives, so let's get this old one out, get this in and see where we're at. Oh yeah, and when we did do this last week, you guys saw the amount of rust that was in the top of the block here, and the likelihood of that being further through the motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull the radiator as well. That way we can make sure that we can back flush this, because whatever's in that engine is now in here. And we'll also, while the pump is off, we'll back flush the whole motor. That way we can be sure we've pushed as much fresh water through the engine as possible and got out as much sludge as we can before we throw it back together. So we'll get the radiator out, we'll get the battery out so that we have a little bit more room to move, and we'll get to it. All right, so we've got the fluid bearing and the pulley off the pump here. Now, before I go taking the water pump out, which would give me multiple outlets, it'd be hard to back flush the whole motor, I'm gonna start by back flushing it as is. So basically the water pump sucks water from the bottom of the radiator and then pumps it through the motor and out through the thermostat housing and into the top of the radiator where it flows down through the radiator. Now, that's why all the rust and everything caked in here, because it's being pushed to here and then it can't get past the thermostat. So yeah, I'm gonna put the hose back on the top because it's easy to fit the end of a normal garden hose into a radiator hose. So I'll put the hose back on the top and then we'll back flush this. Underneath the sway bar for now so it doesn't go everywhere. There we go. Push the hose in the top. It'll take a bit to fill up the engine block first, but then see it running out the bottom. What we're looking for is to have perfectly clear water coming out of that hose. All right, so a fair amount of crud came out then. Now that we've done the full flush, I'm gonna pull the pump off, we'll have a look inside and we'll probably flush it some more. Having a bucket full of water down there to catch all these bolts is just ideal. Nice and hard to get them out later. All right, so that's the pump that came out. You can see that it's been weeping from the weep hole for quite some time. This must have been leaking well before I got the Celica. And inside you can see the impeller is equally rotted out. No surprises that this thing was leaking. But now that we've got the housing opened up, and it actually doesn't look too bad, what I'm gonna do is just fire up the water again and clean all this out. And then what we'll do is clean up the mounting surfaces on the housing, get a new gasket on, and get that second-hand replacement pump in. Not worried about this too much. New gasket. And the new pump, just making sure that the weep hole is back in the original spot at the bottom, or the closest to the bottom. It's not perfect, but it's certainly the lowest point. Bolts back on. Interestingly, you can tell the cars that had aircon by having this second run on the pulley. Out of there. See if we can get this in without loosening the alternator. There we go. All right, so with that all back together, let's get the radiator back flushed. Already seen some big flakes of rusty metal come out of there. We'll keep this running and then I'll show you the aftermath. All right, so this is just after the first bucket full of water. So there's a 10-litre bucket or something. But you can see there's really quite big chunks of muddy metal that's come out of the engine. So yeah, I flushed out that radiator before I put it in the first time. So this is all stuff that's come out of the motor. So we're gonna run a few more buckets through this and then we'll get it back in the car. All right, so it's running pretty good. We still don't have a thermostat. I've got one on order. As I do a proper water pump, we'll change the whole lot then. But this radiator will probably need a recore and it'll be a whole thing. So I'm happy with that as it is. It's got some more muck out in it to keep cleaning. I would like to get the fuel system hooked up to the tank, but to do that, I think the car needs to be the other way around in the driveway. So for now, the next stage is to look at the braking system. So let's pull this wheel off and see what we've got. So this is pretty cool. We have twin piston calipers here. So the standard RA28 have a single slider, so they have a piston on one side and basically it floats and moves back and forwards, but these are twin pistons. So they're Sumitomos, and I'm not sure what size that disc is. I'm just gonna measure that now, and then I will compare it to the ones from Violet Crumbles. All right, so I couldn't really get an accurate measurement, but this one looks like it's about 265, and the other ones look marginally smaller. So I'm gonna go ahead and say these are most likely Corona struts and standard brakes. Now, if that's correct, this is the setup that a lot of people use to do the Pug Lux conversion, which is basically taking these struts, putting Peugeot discs on there that have been machined down, and then putting Hilux 4-pot calipers on. I mean, the good news with that is these struts are really getting hard to find now. Basically, so many people did the conversion that they chewed up all the supplies of these. So yeah, I'm like 90% sure that these are off a Corona and they are suitable for the Pug Lux. If you're watching and you've done the conversion and you can tell whether or not these are the right ones, let me know. But yeah, I really want to see if I can get these bled now. The good news is the master cylinder is dual circuit, so we can just bleed the fronts and see if we can get them to clamp. And if that works, then I will try to bleed the rears, but I'm gonna have to pull the diff to do the bushes anyway, so I'm not really too worried about having rear brakes at the moment. We're not gonna be driving this on the road just yet, so front brakes will be enough to stop the car moving around the property. And worst case scenario, I do still have a working handbrake on this thing. So yeah, I'm gonna throw the vacuum bleeder on these. We'll start on the other side, because you always start with the brake that's furthest away from the master cylinder. So yeah, we'll pull the other side off, we'll get the vacuum bleeder onto it and see whether these are gonna bleed up or not. You can now see the reason why it needs to be bled. This line is not attached to anything, and this one, which is the line that goes from the caliper and is supposed to go to the strut, has been cut. So yeah, we're not gonna be able to bleed these until we get that replaced. Luckily, I have a spare. Brake line in. Brake line in there, and then hopefully we'll meet up somewhere about there. Snug this one off. Right, and that one there is the bleed nipple on the back of the caliper, so that's where we'll bleed from, and as I said, we're bleeding this side first because it's furthest from the reservoir. Right, so this is the front reservoir. It is empty as to be expected. This is the filter that goes inside it, and there's a cap. Looking at the backs, actually still full of fluid. So I actually remember when we rolled this down the driveway, we did have enough brakes to stop it without using the handbrake. So I think the back brakes are good. And all the problem was that line over that side that was cut meant there were no front brakes. So I'm just gonna bleed the front. I'm not gonna worry about the back, which saves us a lot of time today. I think they work. Even if they don't, front brakes and handbrake are enough just for moving around day to day. When it comes to getting this thing licensed and driven around on the road, we're gonna do all new brakes everywhere anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, that back set are just gonna do for now. And this is our vacuum bleeder. It's a pretty simple piece of kit. You hook it up to a compressor, it runs air through it. The passing air creates a Venturi effect here and sucks fluid through the hose into the reservoir. And all we do is connect that black rubber fitting onto the nipple on the caliper and we're good to go. And whenever you can, you want to crack your nipples with a ring spanner. So we're just going to open and close this as we suck the fluid through. Put our connector over the end. That should be a decent seal. Fill up the reservoir, put that back in. All right, so snap forward about half an hour. the brake bleeding didn't work. Now, there's two things. Firstly, on the other side of the car, it actually turned out that this line here was loose. So obviously what they'd just thrown the struts in and not done up the lines properly. So that's tight now and seals. And I would have sucked in a lot of air in this, but the vacuum bleeder just doesn't seem to be cutting the mustard. It may be because newer style calipers have a, sometimes have an O-ring in here, so I don't know if it needs a better seal than what I've got, but it's sucking a lot of air up as well as fluid, so it is draining the reservoir and sucking fluid through, but it's just, I just can't be confident if it's sucking air in through there that I've actually got the air out of the brakes. I mean, the brakes do feel better. They will clamp onto the rotors now, but they're still not 100%. They require some pumping up. So what I'm gonna do is do the old school method, and that's gonna require a helper in the car, and we're just gonna bleed these with a length of hose and just a container filled with a bit of brake fluid. So we'll start on the other side and then we'll come around to this one when we're done. All right, so we've just got a normal hose connected to the back of the caliper, goes all the way down into this tub, and you know, low tech, but it'll do the trick. And we have our helper in the car. Say hi, helper. Hi. Okay, so start pumping. Keep pumping. A little faster. All right, so I don't know if you can see that, but we've got no more air coming out, we're good. So down and hold. Nip that one off. So half an hour working with that vacuum pump to figure out what was wrong, or 5 minutes going old school. Other side. Crack this open. Oh, keep pushing. All right, there's no air in there, so hold. One more. All right, nip that right off. All right, so I'm gonna spin this now, and then Kelly's gonna hit the brakes when I say stop. Stop. Beautiful. All right, we've got brakes. Don't know how well they work. The pads seemed okay and the discs are rusty as, but that'll clean up after a bit. But the main thing is this will stop us as we're moving around. We've still got the brake booster hose to hook up, so we'll do that because we'll need that as well. And that hose just goes straight from the brake booster and then to that hose that we blocked up when we were working on it in the Celica. And while I'm working on this, now's a good time for you guys to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. The next step that I want to do before we go and put this front end together is to firstly drain and refill the gearbox because we had the water in the gearbox fluid. And then secondly is to deal with the fuel system. Now, rather than going to all the hassle and dropping the tank, cleaning it right out, neatening everything up and then putting it back in and refilling it, this car has surprised me at every step of the way with how good it's come out. So I'm going to take a punt, and what I'm going to do is hook the carby up to our little yellow friend directly here again. So remove it from the pump setup. And then what I'm going to do is connect the pump to the supply line of fuel and basically pump the contents of the tank up to the front of the car and out through the head. And if it's pumping clean and it's not full of dust and debris, I'm just going to leave it pump until it's empty. I can't imagine there'll be much, if anything, in the tank. And then if that works, what I'll do is just hook these cables back up and we're going to call it a day, and we'll just monitor the fuel filter to see if it starts clogging up. I mean, at the end of the day, I do have to drop that tank at some stage, but I don't want to do that until I'm ready to weld up the rust that's in the wheel well above it. So yeah, unsurprisingly, the plan is just to let it do for now. So let's get under the car, drain the oil, and then we'll deal with the fuel. All right, so it's a 24 mil on the drain plug. Oh, wow, that was tight. Fluid's pretty clear. We'll give that a minute to drain. All right, that's close enough to drain for me. Plug back in. All right, and then the fill plug is up on the side of the gearbox here, and it's a 17. And just as stiff as the drain plug, it would seem. Okay. And then with that out, what I've done is, you can get pumps that will pump fluid into these from down, but I prefer gravity feed. I did buy one of those pumps, but it pumps about 15 mils every shot. It's not great. So, just pop some hose in through that drain, and then we're going to fill it up from the engine bay. I'm leaving a drain pan directly under this because it is gonna fill and then seep out here and drip otherwise. So yeah, we'll jump in the bay. All right, so I've just put the funnel somewhere where hopefully it won't move around too much. I've got my gear oil. Now, the gearbox takes 2.5 quarts, which is about 2.37, I think, litres. So I'm just gonna pour about 2.2 in here, and then I'm just gonna check because there will be some left in the gearbox of the old oil. So yeah, we'll go for 2.2 and then we'll check to see if it's full. And of course, my hose leaked ever so slightly. That's all right. 90% of it went into the gearbox. 10% came out of this hose. Who'd have thought my gaffer tape wouldn't have worked? The solution to that is obviously more gaffer tape. All right, and that's where we're gonna check it. So yeah, let's pull this out. All right, I'm gonna suggest that probably needs a bit more. Now it looks like it's actually dripping out of the hole, so let's see. All right, so we've definitely got enough in the gearbox now. Just let that drain, and we'll pop that fill plug back in. Just nip that right off. We should be good to go. Okay, so we've got our temporary fuel system together. We've got the carby that's running off the block fuel pump and the yellow fuel container, which is good fuel. And then we have the tank at the back of the car, which I've filled up with some of the old stale fuel out of Violet Crumbles, which will be fine to clean the lines. And then we've got the stock mechanical pump picking up from there. The return is blocked off, and the supply line to the carb comes all the way out here, goes around this line and into this bucket. So the idea is I'm going to start the engine. It's probably going to require some aero start, but we'll start the engine and we'll get it running, and then we'll just leave it running and see if it starts pumping out the fuel that's in the tank into the bucket, and we'll see what quality that fuel is. So I'll fire this up and we'll see what comes out. Oh yeah, I've got to actually turn on my electric fuel pump. Forget this every time. All right, got the fuel running from the tank. It actually doesn't look too bad. A lot of this sediment was already in the bucket. I only cleaned it out half-assed. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep this running, and I think we're gonna be okay. All right, so we pumped a lot of fuel through there. Without a temperature sensor on this and without a shroud around that fan on the other side, I don't want to stress this cooling system too much and end up cooking the motor. So what I'm going to do is hook the electronic pump up to the fuel supply line, and we should be able to pump the rest of this out without a problem. And of course, 10 seconds into having that thing running, it looks like we're nearing the end of the tank. Oh well. So I filled the tank up with 10 litres of good fuel, and you can see if I just squirt that at the side, that's pretty much clear rather than trusty brown rusty over here. So I'm gonna stop wasting this, and we'll get this fuel system hooked up. All right, so that chewed up literally a bucket of fuel, but we did get everything cleaned out. Now what I've done since is put in all the fuel lines. So we've got a supply line going to a filter into the pump, and we've got the return line, and I even replaced the metal line that goes all the way up to the carb. And while I was there, you might notice I stole the carb off Violet Crumbles. Look, to be honest, that old carb was just never gonna work properly. It needs an accelerator pump rebuild at a bare minimum. It needs a full kit through it, really. And those are probably 3 or 4 weeks away, and I can't wait that long for that. So I stole the one from Violet Crumbles. I will rebuild the other one on the bench and throw it back in place of this one at some point. So the good news is, with everything in place and a carby that actually works, we can do this now. That is it, and that is smooth. I mean, we still have half an exhaust, which is going to contribute to a little bit of roughness, but I mean, you really cannot argue with that. Now, I even put a temperature sensor in, a second-hand one, because I'm still waiting, we're now up to 3 weeks just for a temp sensor. Yeah, that's the life in the current climate. But I'm stoked. I'm going to let this run for a little bit, get some heat through the system, see if the temperature gauge in the car actually works. And then I'm going to put this together and I'm going to bring you guys back in once we've got it together, and we'll take it for its first run. All right, so moment of truth. We've got brakes. We don't have a clutch. All right, and just like magic, we've got a new clutch master cylinder. All right, great success there. That came out absolutely awesome. It is the unregistered property hack with a lot of patina and charm, and it's laying the foundation for something that's going to move ahead fairly quickly in the future. Now we'll do some glamour shots here so that you can see the car in a bit more detail, because I've got to admit one thing, and that is that that car is really just YouTube ready. When I was putting the front end together, there's a lot of snapped bolts and missing radiator support and stuff like that. So all these little things that, you know, I put it together so it looks like a complete car, and that's not just for the episode, it's also for the sanity and well-being of my neighbors. So yeah, even though it looks like a complete car, albeit with some bunky panel work on it, there is still a bunch of different things I need to do. The plates that are on it are just decorative plates. That thing is not registered, and therefore I can't legally drive it on the road. But in the short amount of driving that I did up and down the driveway, it seemed pretty strong. And then theoretically, if I had taken it around the block, I feel like the things that I would have reported back was it drives really well in the low end of the rev range. Up top, it's lacking a little bit of grunt. I don't know whether that's an 18RC thing or not. The brakes work and are nice and straight, although the pedal feel is a little bit soft, and I think that might be because we've got those dual calipers on the front and the master cylinder hasn't changed in size. But at this point, who knows? Only time will tell as I continue to work through the system and make improvements. The clutch dying on me was an absolute pain. For those of you that have had the displeasure of changing the clutch master cylinder on a Celica, It's diabolical the way they set it up, but it's in. It does need some fine tuning. The clutch pedal feel isn't great. I'm concerned that there may be a leak there. Perhaps I didn't tighten up one of the lines properly enough, but we'll soon find a puddle of brake fluid if that is the case. But the idea for the car was to get the engine in, get it running and driving, and basically have it look a little bit more like a car, just so the front of this house looks a little less like a tip. And we've managed to tick all those boxes. So I am calling do for now, done for now. And we are going to get back to Violet Crumbles, but not in the next episode. So while I've been working on Dunfa, something else has come my way, and we're going to do a single episode on that next week, and then we're going to do the rear quarters on Violet Crumbles. So I hope you stick around for that one. In the meantime, make sure you like, subscribe, comment below, all that kind of jazz. And if you're new to the channel, you should really check out the full Violet Crumbles series. There's heaps of detail in that about first gen Celicas, and I'll link to that up here. And then down here, I'll throw in the next episodes or some of the A90 content that we've got for the channel. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.